Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you heartfelt tales that inspire and touch the soul. Today, we share the extraordinary journey of James, a billionaire who left behind his fortune in search of something money couldn't buy: true love. From the bustling streets of New York City to a humble farm in Montana, James learns profound lessons about honesty, forgiveness, and the transformative power of genuine human connection. It's a story of hope, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's inspiring story. Once upon a time, in the heart of New York City, where the skyline shimmered with promises of dreams fulfilled, there lived a man named James. From the outside, James appeared to have everything anyone could ever desire. He owned a sprawling penthouse that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, drove cars that turned heads, and possessed a bank account so large that he could afford luxuries others could scarcely imagine. Yet, within the walls of his opulent life, James carried a burden that no amount of wealth could lift: loneliness. People flocked to James for his wealth and influence, never pausing to see the man behind the riches. At every gala, every business meeting, and every high-profile event, James felt like a trophy to be admired rather than a soul to be understood. Women vied for his attention, but their eyes always lingered a little too long on his tailored suits and polished watches, never truly meeting his gaze. He yearned for someone who would see him for who he was: a man with dreams, fears, and a heart capable of deep love. Time and time again, James entered relationships that left him feeling emptier than before. Each woman, no matter how charming, seemed captivated only by what he could give, not who he was. His penthouse grew quieter, his laughter more infrequent. He began to wonder if true love, a love untainted by greed or ambition, was nothing more than a fantasy. One evening, as James sat in his study overlooking the city's twinkling lights, an idea struck him. What if he stepped away from this life of grandeur? What if he stripped himself of the wealth that clouded people's perceptions of him? It was a bold thought, one that made his heart race with both excitement and fear. He decided that the only way to discover if genuine love truly existed was to leave behind his fortune and live as someone else. The plan took shape in his mind with remarkable clarity. He would disguise himself as a homeless man, far from the city where his name and face were known. He would rely on the kindness of strangers, testing whether anyone would care for him without the allure of his riches. It was a risk, but one James felt he had to take. When James shared his plan with his parents, they were horrified. His mother, Evelyn, a poised and influential socialite, implored him to reconsider. "James, this is madness. You're placing yourself in danger. What if someone discovers who you are? Do you realize the risks?" His father, Robert, a stern and pragmatic businessman, echoed her concerns. "You could be robbed, kidnapped, or worse. This is not a game, son." But James was resolute. He assured them he would be careful and choose a place where no one knew him. "I have to do this," he said, his voice steady. "I need to find out if love, real love, exists for someone like me." His parents, though still wary, could see the determination in his eyes and reluctantly gave their blessing. Within days, James had traded his designer suits for tattered clothing and a second-hand wheelchair. He boarded a bus headed west. His destination, a small, picturesque town in Montana, nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. The town, with its cobblestone streets and quaint houses, felt worlds apart from the bustling city he had always known. His first night there was humbling. He found a quiet corner on the main street, where the town's activity slowed as evening fell. With his hand outstretched, he whispered, "Please help me," hoping someone would stop. Most people hurried past, their eyes averted. Some offered quick glances, but none lingered long enough to truly see him. For the first time in his life, James felt invisible. Days turned into nights, and the loneliness he had hoped to escape began to creep back into his heart. It was a bitter irony that, Even in disguise, he remained unseen. But one day, as the afternoon sun bathed the town in a golden glow, a young woman approached him. Her name was Emma. Emma was in her early 20s, with warm hazel eyes and a soft, genuine smile. She carried an air of quiet strength, though her worn shoes and simple dress spoke of a life of modest means. Her family owned a small farm on the outskirts of town, and they worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Yet, despite her struggles, Emma always seemed to find a reason to smile. When Emma saw James sitting in his wheelchair, looking weary and hungry, her heart softened. She stopped, crouched down to meet his gaze, and asked gently, "Are you okay?" James was taken aback. It had been days since anyone had spoken to him, let alone with such concern. He hesitated, then said, "I'm just trying to get by." His voice was shaky, his heart pounding in his chest. Emma reached into her small purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Here," she said, pressing them into his hand. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." James felt a lump in his throat. The kindness in her gesture, so pure and unassuming, moved him deeply. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't know how much this means to me." Emma smiled softly. "Do you have a place to stay?" she asked. When James shook his head, she bit her lip, torn between her desire to help and the reality of her family's limited resources. "I live with my father, Hank," she explained. "Our house is small, but I'll talk to him. Maybe we can find a way to help you." With that, Emma hurried home, her heart heavy with concern. As she walked through the door of their modest farmhouse, she found her father resting after a long day in the fields. Hank, with his weathered hands and kind eyes, had always been a pillar of strength and compassion in her life. Emma recounted her encounter with James, her voice hesitant. "He has nowhere to go, Dad," she said, her worry evident. "I want to help him, but I don't know if we can." Hank listened silently, then sighed deeply. "We don't have much," he said, "but no one deserves to be left out in the cold. Bring him here. We'll figure something out." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude for her father's unwavering generosity. Without wasting another moment, she grabbed her shawl and hurried back to where she had left James. When she returned, he was still there, his face etched with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "My father said you shouldn't stay out here alone tonight," Emma said softly. "Come with me. We'll give you a place to sleep." James blinked, stunned by her offer. He had never expected such kindness from a stranger. With Emma's help, he made his way to their home, a simple yet welcoming place that radiated warmth. For the first time in years, James felt a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps, in this small town and within this humble family, he might find the love he had been searching for all his life. As James crossed the threshold of Emma's home, he felt an unfamiliar sense of warmth wash over him. The house was modest, a small living room with mismatched furniture, a faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air, and walls adorned with simple photographs of Emma and her father, Hank. Yet, it was more welcoming than any penthouse he had ever known. For the first time, James didn't feel judged or scrutinized. He wasn't a billionaire here, he was just a man in need. Hank greeted James with a firm handshake and a nod, his eyes kind but cautious. "Welcome," he said gruffly, as if unsure how else to address the situation. "We don't have much, but what's ours is yours while you're here." James, unaccustomed to such generosity, was at a loss for words. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice sincere. Emma guided him to a small room at the back of the house, where a cot had been prepared. A thin mattress and a patchwork quilt awaited him, but it felt like a luxury compared to the hard pavement he had grown used to. That night, as James lay on the cot, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought of Emma's gentle smile and the way Hank had extended his hand without hesitation. These people, who had so little, had offered him so much. Guilt crept into his thoughts as he remembered the lie he was living. He had come here pretending to be someone he wasn't, testing their kindness. But their compassion was so genuine it felt undeserved. Over the following days, James grew closer to Emma and Hank. Emma often brought him meals, her soft voice filling the small room with stories about the town, their farm, and her dreams of a better future. She was intelligent and thoughtful, her laughter light and musical. Hank, though quieter, often shared wisdom gleaned from years of hard work and hardship. Together, they gave James something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, Emma asked, "Do you have family, James? Anyone wondering where you are?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, unsure how much truth he could reveal. Finally, he said, "I do. But they're far away. Things didn't work out." He hoped the vagueness of his answer would suffice. And Emma, sensing his discomfort, didn't press further. Meanwhile, James observed the toll his presence was taking on Emma and Hank. Their farm, though productive, barely sustained them. Yet they never once complained about the extra mouth to feed or the time spent helping him. Instead, they worked harder, often staying up late to finish chores they couldn't complete during the day. One afternoon, as James sat outside watching Hank work the fields, Emma joined him, carrying a small basket of apples. She handed him one and sat beside him on the bench. "You seem lost in thought," she said, her voice gentle. "Is something troubling you?" James looked at her, his chest tightening with emotion. He wanted to tell her everything, that he wasn't the man she thought he was, that he had a fortune waiting for him back in New York, and that he had deceived her and her father. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "I've been through a lot. It's hard to talk about." Emma placed a hand on his. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone. My father and I are here for you." Her sincerity struck him deeply, and for the first time, he wondered if he was making a mistake. How could he let these people continue to sacrifice for him when they didn't even know the truth? The turning point came when Hank, who had noticed James struggle to maneuver in his wheelchair, asked about his injury. James, caught off guard, fabricated a story about a car accident that had left him paralyzed. Hank listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. The next morning, James overheard a conversation between Emma and her father. "He said he needs surgery." Emma whispered, "What if we sold the land by the river? It's good property, we could get a decent price." James froze. The land by the river? He had seen Hank tending that land with care, speaking of its importance to their family's history. The idea that they would part with it for him was unbearable. The guilt became too much to bear. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, James couldn't look either of them in the eye. Finally, he set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I need to tell you both something." Emma and Hank exchanged glances. Sensing the gravity of his tone, James took a deep breath and began. "I haven't been completely honest with you. I'm not who you think I am." His voice faltered, but he pressed on, confessing his true identity and the reasons behind his charade. As his words filled the room, the warmth that had once surrounded him seemed to evaporate. Hank's face hardened, his hands clenched into fists. Emma, sitting across from James, looked at him as if she no longer recognized him. "You lied to us," she said, her voice trembling. "After everything we've done for you, you were testing us." "I didn't mean to hurt you," James said, his voice pleading. "I wanted to find out if someone could love me for who I am, not what I have." Hank stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, he walked out of the house. Emma sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. "You've made fools of us," she said, her voice breaking. "You watched us give everything, knowing it was all a lie." James reached out, desperate to explain, but Emma pulled away. I think you should leave, she whispered before rising and disappearing into her room. James sat alone in the now cold kitchen. The weight of his actions pressing down on him. For the first time, he realized that in his quest for love, he had betrayed the very people who had shown him what it truly meant. James returned to his room that night, his heart heavy with regret. The warmth and comfort that had once filled Emma and Hank's home were replaced with silence so loud it seemed to echo. He barely slept, haunted by the look in Emma's eyes, the pain, the betrayal, the disappointment. The next morning, James found Hank outside by the riverbank. The older man was sitting on a tree stump, staring out at the rippling water. James approached cautiously, unsure if his presence would be welcome. "Hank," he began, his voice tentative. Hank didn't look at him. "You've got a lot of nerve coming out here," he said, his tone low but firm. "I opened my home to you, trusted you, and all along, you were lying to us." James nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're right. I don't deserve your kindness. I don't even deserve to be here. But I never meant to hurt you or Emma. I wanted to find something real." Hank finally turned to face him, his weathered face lined with anger and sorrow. "And this is how you go about it? Pretending to be someone you're not? Letting people sacrifice for you? That's not real, James. That's manipulation." James dropped his gaze to the ground. "I know," he said quietly. "I made a terrible mistake. But I want to make it right. Please, tell me how I can fix this." Hank stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Fix it," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just throw money at this and expect it to be fixed. Some things you can't buy, James. Trust is one of them." With that, Hank walked away, leaving James alone by the river. The weight of Hank's words settled over him, suffocating in their truth. Back in New York City, James' absence had not gone unnoticed. His father, Robert, had grown increasingly frustrated. For weeks, he had brushed off questions from colleagues and business associates about James' whereabouts. But his patience was wearing thin. When James finally returned to the city, it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he felt he owed his parents an explanation. Evelyn, his mother, greeted him with relief. "James, thank God. Do you have any idea how worried we've been? Where have you been?" Before James could answer, Robert appeared in the doorway of the study, his expression as stern as ever. "About time you showed up," he said. "Get in here." James followed his father into the study, his mother trailing behind. The moment the door closed, Robert unleashed his frustration. "You've been gallivanting around, playing some ridiculous game while I've had to cover for you. Do you understand the position you've put this family in?" James clenched his fists, his father's words igniting a spark of anger. "This isn't about the family," he said, his voice steady. "This is about me. I needed to get away, to figure out who I am and what I want. And what you want is to embarrass us." Robert shot back. "To throw away everything we've worked for? I've been planning your future, James. You'll marry Rachel. Her father's influence will secure my governorship. That's how this works." "No," James said firmly. "I won't marry her. I don't even know her. And I certainly don't love her." "Love?" Robert's voice dripped with disdain. "You think this is about love? This is about power. About securing your place in this world. Forget this nonsense about some girl in the middle of nowhere. She's irrelevant." James stepped closer, his anger bubbling over. "She's not irrelevant. Emma and her father showed me more kindness than anyone in this city ever has. They cared for me when they thought I had nothing. While all you care about is appearances and alliances." Evelyn tried to intervene, placing a hand on Robert's arm. "Robert, please," she said softly. "Let's not push him away." But Robert wouldn't back down. "Push him away?" He's pushing himself away. "If you walk out of this house again, James, don't bother coming back." James stared at his father, his chest heaving with a mix of rage and sorrow. "If that's how it is, then so be it," he said. He turned to his mother, his voice softer. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't stay here." Before anyone could stop him, James left the room, his heart pounding. As he packed a small bag, he thought of Emma and Hank. He had betrayed them, but he couldn't leave things as they were. He had to make amends, no matter how long it took. That evening, James boarded a bus back to Montana. The journey felt endless, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. When he arrived at Emma's home, the lights were off, and the house looked quiet. He knocked softly, unsure if they would even let him in. Emma opened the door, her expression unreadable. "James," she said, her voice neutral. "Why are you here?" "I had to come back," he said. "I had to try to make things right." Emma hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The warmth of the house, though familiar, now felt distant. Hank was sitting at the table, his gaze sharp as it landed on James. James took a deep breath. "I know I've hurt you both, and I can't undo that. But I'm here because I care. I want to help in any way I can." Hank said nothing, but Emma's eyes softened just a little. "It's not going to be easy," she said. "You broke our trust, James. That doesn't heal overnight." "I know," James said, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." As the night wore on, the air between them remained heavy with unspoken emotions. Yet, in that small house in Montana, there was a flicker of something that hadn't been there before: hope. James stayed in Montana, determined to regain the trust he had shattered. Days turned into weeks, and although Hank and Emma were polite, the warmth he had once felt in their presence remained elusive. He worked tirelessly to prove his sincerity. James joined Hank on the farm, waking up at dawn to tend the fields, repair fences, and help with whatever tasks needed doing. It was grueling work, a far cry from the boardrooms and luxurious evenings he had known. But James welcomed it. He wanted to understand the life they lived, the life they had shared with him without hesitation. One afternoon, James was repairing a section of the chicken coop when Hank approached him. The older man leaned against a nearby post, watching James work in silence. After a moment, he said, "Why are you really here, James?" James straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because I care about you and Emma," he replied earnestly. "You opened your home to me when I had nothing. I know I broke your trust, and I may never deserve your forgiveness. But I'm here because I want to try." Hank studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "You've got a long way to go, but actions speak louder than words. Keep showing us who you are." Those words were a small step forward, but they fueled James' determination. He threw himself into the work, not only to help but also to repay the debt he felt in his heart. As he spent more time with Hank, he began to understand the man's quiet strength and the depth of his love for his daughter. Hank wasn't just a hard-working farmer, he was a man who carried the weight of his family's legacy, his pride in their small farm as strong as his calloused hands. Emma, too, began to soften. Though cautiously, she often watched James from a distance, her emotions warring within her. She had seen the worst of him when his lies came to light. But now she was beginning to see something else: a man willing to change, to confront his own flaws. One evening, after a long day of work, Emma found James sitting by the river. The water sparkled under the fading sunlight, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets. She approached quietly, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. James looked up, surprised, and nodded. "Of course." For a while, they sat in silence, watching the current. Finally, Emma spoke. "You've been working hard." James smiled faintly. "It's the least I can do. I owe you and your father so much." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why did you lie, James?" Why come here pretending to be someone you're not? He hesitated, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. I thought it was the only way to find something real, he admitted. All my life, people have only seen my wealth. I wanted to know if someone could see me, love me, for who I am, not what I have. Emma's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. What you didn't realize is that love isn't something you test, James. It's something you give. You don't have to pretend to be poor to be worthy of love. You just have to be honest. Her words struck him deeply, and for the first time, he saw the truth in them. I see that now, he said quietly, and I'm sorry, Emma, for everything. Over the next few weeks, small changes began to emerge. Emma and James talked more, their conversations filled with laughter and shared stories. Hank began to include James in the farm's decision-making, a subtle but significant gesture of trust. Slowly, the walls between them started to crumble. Then came the day James decided to take a leap of faith. He had spent nights thinking about how to help without overstepping or causing more harm. Early one morning, he gathered Hank and Emma in the kitchen. There's something I want to do for you, he began, his voice steady but nervous. I want to invest in the farm, not as a way to pay for your forgiveness, but because I believe in what you've built here. Hank's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. James continued, You've given me so much more than I deserve. I want to help you expand, maybe even modernize. Think of it as a partnership, not charity. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Hank spoke, his voice cautious but not dismissive. You're asking us to trust you again. Yes, James said earnestly, and I know that's not easy. But I'm not the same man who came here looking for answers. I've learned what matters. And it's not the money. It's people. It's family. Hank looked at Emma, whose expression was thoughtful but not opposed. Finally, Hank nodded. We'll think about it. Though it wasn't a definitive yes. It was more than James had hoped for. Over time, the idea grew on them. James' genuine willingness to work alongside them, combined with his humility and respect for their values, helped bridge the gap. Together, they began to plan ways to improve the farm while preserving its essence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Emma turned to James. You've changed, she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Because of you and your father, he replied. You've shown me what real love and kindness look like. Emma smiled. A small but meaningful gesture. We're not there yet, James. But maybe we can get there. For the first time in months, James felt hope blossom in his chest. He had come to Montana seeking love and lost his way. But now he was beginning to find it again, not through deception or wealth, but through honesty, hard work, and a willingness to change. While James worked to rebuild the trust he had shattered, back in New York, the threads of his old life were unraveling in unexpected ways. Lauren, Emma's former friend, had long been consumed by envy. In her mind, Emma's humility and quiet charm had always drawn attention that she, with all her calculated confidence and beauty, could never achieve. Lauren had once set her sights on wealth and status, believing they would secure the happiness she craved. But that path had led her to ruin. Months earlier, Lauren had crossed paths with Judah, a smooth-talking businessman who was as ambitious as he was unscrupulous. Judah had made a habit of preying on women's insecurities, offering promises of wealth and love in exchange for their loyalty. Lauren, blinded by her desire to climb the social ladder, had fallen for his charm. Judah, however, had his own motives. His interest in Lauren was purely transactional. She was a pawn in his attempts to win favor with influential people in New York society. When his schemes failed, Judah abandoned Lauren, leaving her with nothing but shattered dreams and a growing realization of how far she had fallen. Lauren's downward spiral began shortly after. She found herself pregnant, a reality she hadn't planned for. And the man she thought would stand by her was nowhere to be found. With no savings and no stable support system, she was forced to leave her apartment, eventually landing on the streets. Her once pristine appearance was replaced by exhaustion and despair, and the pride that had kept her from reaching out for help now trapped her in isolation. Months passed, and Lauren became a shadow of her former self. The streets of New York were unforgiving, and each day was a fight for survival. The bright lights and bustling crowds that once symbolized opportunity now served as a harsh reminder of what she had lost. She often thought of Emma, who had chosen a simple life in Montana, who had refused to be swept away by empty promises. Lauren's envy had blinded her to what truly mattered. Meanwhile, in Montana, James and Emma continued to find their footing. Trust was being rebuilt, albeit slowly, and their shared work on the farm brought them closer each day. Emma's cautious warmth toward James gave him hope that perhaps their relationship could grow into something real. Then, one fateful day, Emma's life intersected with Lauren's again in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Emma had traveled to New York City to meet with a supplier for the farm, hoping to secure better equipment for their growing operations. As she walked down a crowded street, she noticed a figure huddled against a building, her clothes tattered and her face gaunt. Something about the woman seemed familiar. Emma's heart clenched as she recognized Lauren. She stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to approach. The Lauren she remembered had been proud, elegant, and filled with confidence. Even if it was misplaced, the woman before her now was a shadow of that person. Emma hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Lauren," she asked gently. The woman looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. Tears immediately welled up as Lauren's face crumpled with emotion. "Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Emma crouched down, her hand resting lightly on Lauren's arm. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern rather than judgment. Lauren broke down, the words spilling out between sobs. She told Emma everything: Judah's betrayal, her pregnancy, and the harsh reality of life on the streets. "I was so stupid," Lauren said, her voice breaking. "I thought chasing wealth would make me happy. I thought it would make me better than I was. But now, look at me. I'm nothing." Emma's heart ached as she listened. Despite the hurtful things Lauren had once said and done, Emma couldn't bring herself to feel anger. Instead, she felt a deep sense of pity and compassion. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook where she kept important numbers. "We're going to get you help," she said firmly. Lauren shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you help me after everything I did to you?" Emma smiled faintly, her voice steady. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Lauren, I don't care about what happened before. I just want to make sure you're okay now." Over the next few days, Emma made arrangements to get Lauren into a shelter and connected her with organizations that could help her navigate her pregnancy and rebuild her life. Lauren was overwhelmed by Emma's kindness, her gratitude spilling out in every conversation. "You're a better person than I'll ever be," she said one evening as they sat together at the shelter. Emma shook her head. "That's not true, Lauren. You've just lost your way. But you can find it again." Lauren's journey was far from over. But for the first time in months, she felt hope. Emma returned to Montana soon after, her heart heavy but full of resolve. Helping Lauren had reminded her of a fundamental truth: everyone carried their own battles. And sometimes, all it took was a little compassion to help someone find their footing again. Back at the farm, James noticed a subtle change in Emma. She seemed lighter, more at peace. When he asked her about her trip, she hesitated at first but then shared the story of her encounter with Lauren. James listened intently, his admiration for Emma deepening. "You're an incredible person, Emma," he said. "The way you forgive, the way you help others, it's inspiring." Emma looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "It's not about being incredible. James. It's about understanding that we all make mistakes. The real challenge is learning from them and helping others do the same. Her words stayed with James long after that conversation. Emma's ability to see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves, was a reminder of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. He resolved to continue proving that he was worthy of the second chance she had given him. As spring arrived in Montana, the farm blossomed along with the relationships that had been sown there. James had become an integral part of the farm's daily life, not only contributing to its operations but also to the spirit of the small family. The days were filled with hard work and laughter, and the evenings brought quiet moments of reflection. Slowly but surely, the scars of betrayal began to heal, replaced with something stronger, a foundation built on trust and understanding. Hank, ever the pragmatist, kept a watchful eye on James. Although his initial skepticism hadn't completely faded, he saw the transformation in the young man. James wasn't just trying to win Emma's affection, he was genuinely invested in the life they had built together on the farm. Hank began to view James not as an outsider, but as someone who truly cared for both him and his daughter. One warm evening, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was filled with the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil, and the distant sounds of chirping crickets provided a soothing backdrop. Emma glanced at James, her eyes reflecting the soft hues of the setting sun. "I never thought we'd get here," she said quietly. James met her gaze, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But I'm grateful every day that we did." Hank cleared his throat, a rare smile spreading across his face. "You've proven yourself, James. I wasn't sure about you in the beginning, but you've earned your place here." The words carried a weight that wasn't lost on James. "Thank you, Hank," he said earnestly. "That means more to me than I can say." As the days turned into weeks, James began to think about the future. He had come to Montana searching for something real, and he had found it in Emma and Hank. The question that lingered now was how to take the next step. James had always been decisive in business, but when it came to matters of the heart, he found himself second-guessing every move. One evening, after dinner, James asked Emma to take a walk with him by the river. The night was cool, the stars bright against the inky sky. They walked in comfortable silence, the gentle sound of the water accompanying their steps. Finally, James stopped and turned to face her. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I came here to find something I thought I'd never have, something real. And I found it. I found it in you." Emma's breath caught as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Kneeling before her, he opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "I know I've made mistakes," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, "but you've shown me what it means to love and to be loved. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emma's eyes as she looked at him, her heart pounding. She had spent months rebuilding her trust in James, and in that moment, she realized she no longer doubted his sincerity. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, James. I'll marry you." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, a wave of relief and joy washed over him. He rose to his feet, pulling her into an embrace. For the first time in years, he felt truly complete. The news of their engagement brought a mix of reactions from New York. Evelyn, James' mother, was overjoyed. She had come to respect Emma after hearing about the sacrifices she and Hank had made for her son. Evelyn called Emma immediately, offering heartfelt congratulations and promising to help with the wedding preparations. Robert, on the other hand, remained distant. Although he begrudgingly accepted James' decision, he couldn't fully mask his disappointment. The political alliances he had envisioned were no longer possible, and his relationship with his son remained strained. James, however, refused to let his father's disapproval overshadow his happiness. The wedding took place on the farm, under the wide Montana sky. Friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate, their joy filling the air. Emma wore a simple white dress, her beauty radiant and understated. James stood by her side, his face glowing with pride and love. Hank walked her down the aisle, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. As they exchanged vows, James couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. He had once believed that wealth and status were the keys to happiness. But Emma and Hank had shown him the true meaning of love, sacrifice, and family. The reception was a lively affair, filled with music, laughter, and heartfelt toasts. Evelyn charmed the guests with her warmth and grace, while Hank shared stories that brought both laughter and tears. Emma and James danced under the stars, their joy radiating through the crowd. Months later, as summer gave way to autumn, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news filled the house with even more excitement. James was ecstatic, his love for Emma deepening as he anticipated the arrival of their child. Hank, too, was overjoyed, the thought of becoming a grandfather bringing a renewed sense of purpose to his life. As the seasons changed, the farm flourished, and so did the bond between James, Emma, and Hank. Their life was far from perfect, but it was rich with love and meaning. James had learned that true happiness couldn't be bought, it was built, day by day, with the people who mattered most. And so, under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the rolling fields and the warmth of family, James and Emma began their new chapter together. Their journey had been fraught with challenges, but they had emerged stronger, bound by the love and trust they had fought so hard to create. And so, James and Emma's journey became a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and personal growth. From the bustling streets of New York City to the serene beauty of a Montana farm, they proved that true happiness lies not in wealth or status but in the bonds we create and cherish. With Hank by their side, their family flourished, grounded in honesty and compassion. James learned that the greatest riches in life come from the heart, not the bank. Their story reminds us all of the importance of kindness, resilience, and staying true to what matters most. As their love grew stronger, they continued to inspire those around them to believe in second chances and the beauty of an authentic connection. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of love, life, and transformation. Stay tuned for our next story.